The big puzzle in evolutionary psychology revolves around the origins and effects of perceptions. This has led to the study of the origins and development of ideas, because that's the critical part. This is called Mimetic Evolution. Mimetic Evolution was discovered by Richard Dawkins and pioneered by Dr. Susan Blackmore in her book, The Meme Machine. Every time you think of an idea and then think of a better idea, your ideas are evolving. The idea that your brain perceives to maximize your genetic survival replaces the idea that it doesn't perceive to maximize your genetic survival. That's still natural selection. That's your brain killing off some of your ideas instead of something else killing you off. So Hitler's ultimate solution of killing off ideas by killing the people who had the ideas would have been a perfect strategy about 3 million years ago. 8 years ago, President Bush announced that we're in a war of ideas, and he immediately sent our military to go win it. The purpose of the military is not to educate people or to communicate with them. The purpose of the military is to kill people. What Hitler and Bush didn't understand was that it's too late to kill ideas by killing people. As members of the same species, we all share a universal brain structure. If you kill the people who have certain ideas, that does nothing to prevent someone else from thinking of the same ideas. This is why politicians need education. As someone else once said, this is why revolutions are won with ideas, not with bullets. The evolution of ideas outran the evolution of our genes at least 40,000 years ago. The most dramatic piece of evidence is the Chauvet cave paintings in southern France. They are great works of art by modern standards, but they are 30,000 years old, which means they were painted by people who had brains like ours. This is the reason so many of the long-term effects we're having on the world now are counterintuitive to us. We are all born with brains that evolved in the Stone Age. About 40,000 years ago, our ancestors evolved enough intelligence to start developing ideas that would eventually remove us from the Stone Age technologically. But that did nothing about our genetic evolution. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, for instance, President Kennedy faced a lot of opposition from people who thought we ought to just throw down with the Soviet Union and start a nuclear war. Now that evolutionary psychologists like Dr. Pinker have gone back and looked at the decisions people kept trying to get President Kennedy to make, they can see that if it had been the Cuban wooden club crisis, it would have been a perfect strategy. The environmental crisis is a much more complicated version of that basic problem. The impact of any species on its environment is held in balance by all the other species. Zebras eat grass at the same rate lions eat zebras, so the amount of grass, zebras, and lions in the environment stays stable. The evolution of human intellect threw our relationship to the environment out of balance. Now that we're so much more intelligent than any other species, there's no species on Earth that can balance out the effect we're having on the environment. Over the course of history, as we have thought of the ideas and made the decisions that seemed best to us, we have been combining our Stone Age instincts with our current level of knowledge to make plans for the future. And it keeps getting us into trouble. This brings me to Guns, Germs, and Steel by Dr. Jared Diamond. About 10,000 years ago, the plains of Mesopotamia were the most favorable environment in the world for human habitation. There was so much food to hunt and gather that the people there could live in permanent villages. So they made the best decisions they could think of and maximized their genetic survival. But that meant using all the food they could get to feed as many children as they could raise. That meant population growth. That meant more people hunting the local gazelle herds every year. Eventually, that meant the gazelle herds getting wiped out. That meant a lot of Mesopotamians looking for new ways to get food. Soon enough, some of them noticed that food plants were growing out of their waste dumps from previous years. Then they figured out how to plant seeds themselves. Since they lived in permanent villages, they could tend their plants year-round. So began the agricultural revolution. That same process played out later in other parts of the world. But it still didn't stop population growth. All it did was to provide more food. When the land couldn't produce any more food, the population started spreading out, looking for more land. Since they had so many people now, they outnumbered their neighbors, so it was easy for them to take their neighbors' land. So began the empires of the Middle East, China, the Maya, and the Inca. None of the first farmers had any way of knowing about the chemical cycles taking place in their soil that made it produce their food. Over-farming led to the depletion of soil nutrients and soil erosion. Irrigation led to the salinization of the soil, which is why the Middle East is now a desert.